Okay, give him a minute to catch his breath.
You ate, right?
Okay.
I'm just pooped, that's all. Shooting from here up. Where's the camera?
There he is.
1976 was a year of many things. The bicentennial of the United States, the year of Jimmy Carter's presidential election, and the unveiling of the Enterprise. This last bit, though, refers not just to NASA's first space shuttle, which happened to be the second major enterprise of 1976. The first was that fateful day in August when Christine and Bill Eyler purchased the all-but-forgotten property, St. Elizabeth. St. Elizabeth, though she was left for dead by the time of Eyler's purchase, is not just a random plot of land in the middle of nowhere, nestled in the Catoctin Mountains of the small Maryland town of Thurmont, mere minutes from the Camp David presidential retreat. St. Elizabeth is a reminder of the history of America from before its independence. She is a piece of living history. Well, at least she is today. For over a century before 1976, however, she lay dormant, a decrepit photograph of the time forgotten even by her closest neighbors. But let's take a step back for a second, because it wasn't always this way. Colonial America was a place for innovation and enterprise, especially when it came to property, and St. Elizabeth was no exception to this. Originally surveyed in 1743 by prominent landowner Daniel Delaney, Sr., St. Elizabeth not only shares her birthday with Nathaniel Green, George Friedrich Handel's The Messiah, and the Celsius temperature scale, it also exists as one of the only extant original lands older than the United States, sharing the company of entire cities like Boston and Jamestown. This is not without a deal of close calls and near deaths, and St. Elizabeth has seen a number of miracles since its creation. Most strikingly, much of Delaney's land was seized by the United States government during and after the Revolution. Thankfully, St. Elizabeth was sold to one Paul Sipe only a few years before the Revolution began, miraculously sparing it from time's levied hand. And this sale was itself born of luck, as Sipe was the fourth owner of the land, having purchased it from Delaney's sons after the man who bought it from the elder Delaney, the famous Moravian Adam Spock, mysteriously left Maryland, having nothing to the land and paid nothing to Delaney, who died in 1753. Had Delaney's son not quickly and successfully lobbied for the land to be returned to them, Sipe may never have been able to save her. The land subsequently passed into the hands of one of the many John Wellers who had immigrated to the area during the Moravian expansion into the United States, and this connection would prove significant. The Moravians, a group of Protestant Christians originally from Germany, had begun immigrating to the United States during the mid-18th century to escape, like so many others, religious persecution in Europe. While many ultimately settled in Pennsylvania, Virginia, and North Carolina, a not unimpressive group landed in an area which includes present-day Thurmont. Establishing a community, especially one as integrated as the Moravians desired, required a significant amount of land, and St. Elizabeth offered a unique opportunity for the John Weller in question, allowing his family to play an active role in the community, especially since the original Moravian church of the area is rumored to have been built somewhere within a mile of St. Elizabeth property. Even more significantly, it is believed that Weller's son-in-law, John Bourne, built the original and still standing brick house on the property, a home with obvious debts to Moravian architecture. These architectural elements imply its inclusion in a Moravian community, including but not limited to the Flemish bond brick trim, its original size, 1.5 stories, and center hall plan. However, the home incorporated some English elements, including the gable and the chimneys. This incorporation hints at St. Elizabeth's place as a transitory piece of Moravian architecture, situated between original and late Moravian construction practices. Therefore, while the home echoes a few other Moravian-style structures across North Carolina and Pennsylvania, its unique property suggests a singular place in Moravian and American architecture, a so-called Elizabethan Moravian style of construction. Other prominent features include a beaded chair rail, the original of which Bill used as reference to Reconstructed, a center attic window with a segmental arc and keystone, and 3 symmetrical bay openings on the main elevation. Numerous examples of folk art also exist, including a painted horse, visible on the door now used for the laundry room, and initials carved into the original staircase. Like those stairway carvings, St. Elizabeth, though vibrant, bears the scars of her history, having persisted through scores of time, and the hands of more than 16 different families, from the cracking of the Liberty Bell and the Civil War, to the birth of radio, 2 world wars, Elvis, the Beatles, and the Rubik's Cube. St. Elizabeth and her home existed on the periphery of the world for centuries. It may have even inherited a few ghosts along the way. Situated near 2 of the most haunted places in America, Gettysburg and Frederick, it seems natural, or maybe unnatural, that St. Elizabeth would play host to otherworldly encounters. It is reported that in early 19th century, a family's young son drowned in the well on the property, though references to this story are hard to find. Chris, however, shares her own harrowing account of a ghostly visit related to this event.
In late spring, early summer, Gus and Rachel were about 3 and 4, and I told them to stay outside and play in my little kitchen garden. And they would stay there. I said, I'm going to put a load of clothes in. So I ran in, and then while I'm loading the washing machine, I heard within me, not necessarily an auditory sound, but it was a panic. It was a woman that said, the children, the children. And I go running out. They're not in the little kitchen garden. They're down at the spring house. And they were dancing on this huge slab of stone, but if you would trip, you could fall inside into the well. Well, when Bill came home, I told him about this, and it had really scared me, and I said, please, Bill, you will close this up tonight. I'm not going to wait. So he did. And the most curious thing happened when we were starting and continuing our research on the home here. We were at the Moravian church. There was a family, and her name was Christina, and she had a little boy who was 4 years old. And apparently it was recorded in the church documents. He had tripped, hit his head on the same slab, rolled and fell into the well, and he died.
Reports have also been made about disembodied voices and music in the house, perhaps an echo of its Moravian heritage, and considering the expanse of the property at over 26 acres, one can only imagine the secrets buried beneath the land.
Everyone went to bed, and Claire and the cousins, they all went upstairs. Sleeping bags, beds, air mattresses. And Claire said it was around 2 o'clock in the morning, and she swears that she heard music, coming from downstairs, people singing, not loud, but she says it was definitely church music that she heard. She came down, and when she peeked into the existing family room at that time, everything stopped.
Scars can have a hard time healing, however, and St. Elizabeth was no exception. Time had lost its prize once before centuries earlier, settling for the consolation of relative obscurity. But now he had grown restless. Though once before saved, St. Elizabeth had seemingly had its run of things, and time was determined to regain what he had before been denied. And during those years in which the world saw perhaps the greatest leap forward, St. Elizabeth became a victim of poverty and decrepitude. Despite the world changing and often world-progressing events of the 20th century, St. Elizabeth was doing anything but advancing. While men were walking the moon and Jimi Hendrix was setting fire to guitars, St. Elizabeth was becoming a victim to the often overlooked poverty of the mid-20th century. She began to descend from her lofty historical heights to the desolate landscape which haunted her back in 1752. In particular, her longest owners, the Jacksons, seemed to be living a manifestation of Van Gogh's The Potato Eaters. As the Eylers relate, living conditions were beyond impoverished.
Now, they had one bulb in every room. They had cut through the floors, and they had one hanging bulb, and they had like 15 amp service. Well, the toilet paper story was the fact that they were so poor they couldn't buy it, so the mother of the last group of kids that went through here had learned from her mother how to take corn husks and boil them and then treat them with some kind of oil, and then that would make them very soft, and then she would put them out in the outhouse, and that's what people would use in lieu of toilet paper.
This was tragic, and St. Elizabeth's condemnation seemed all but guaranteed when the property was finally purchased by the conglomerate, the Hewley Company, in 1974, with the intention of converting her into an equestrian racetrack. In another miracle, however, plans for this track fell through, and 1976 dawned on the nation. Charles William Eyler was born in 1949, a Thurmont man through and through, growing up in the small town that would soon learn its size was no match for one of its greatest progeny. A master craftsman, woodmaker, and composer, among many other things, Eyler had lofty ambitions, many of which he would ultimately achieve. One of these was the derelict property which he would often pass along the lonesome Jimtown route.
I drove down Route 550, and in the winter I would look back and see this house, and at some point I saw the date stone, or at least the hole where there was a date stone, and determined that it had to be an early home. Then I had to try to figure out how to get back here and where the lane actually was or is.
There seemed to be something calling him to the little house down the lane. Perhaps he was drawn to a then unknown connection to the property. That John Weller, who purchased the property nearly 2 centuries before, was actually Bill Eyler's ancestor.
At some point, the Wellers, who lived on the land across the creek down there and had another home similar to this one and a mill, John Weller purchased this land and built this house. At some given point, the Wellers, or one of them, moved to the town, which was called Mechanicstown at the time, and we followed it, traced it back to a Weller being one of our great-great-great-grandmothers, and so there was a connection, I'm sure. I've always been interested in the genealogy part of it, and I always knew that as we went back through there, we would find a lot of similar names and with similar backgrounds, and that's simply because of that regional German group that was here, intermarrying, which they did all the time. I mean, that's just the way it worked. There was very little social activity except for the church, and they were stuck on the farm 99% of their life. So I wasn't overwhelmed by the fact that we had some roots here in some way.
Having graduated with degrees in theater and set construction, Bill was no stranger to major projects, from Shakespeare to Leonard Bernstein, though he had never tackled anything the size of St. Elizabeth.
This property, which was a ridiculous price of $30,000 for the whole thing, was, in anybody's opinion, just a dump. It was awful, and to think that it had any appeal whatsoever, people thought we were nuts. It was a wreck.
Thankfully, he had help. Master designer, craftswoman, decorator, fabricator, and thanatologist, Christine Eyler was born in 1950 in the roughneck neighborhood of East St. Louis. By the time she married Bill in 1971, she had already made something of a name for herself, having worked with numerous legends and celebrities, including the renowned Vladimir Horowitz and soul icon Lou Rawls, all while garnering a multitude of advanced degrees. If St. Elizabeth owes its modern existence to Bill, it owes its life to Chris.
I was a tech theater major. I knew about putting things together. When I knew about the time period of the home, I was able to pull upon all of that knowledge in helping us decide like what we were going to do. You know, I always felt that I was just a sort of like an average student and an average person, and this was something that someone really special could only accomplish. But then I became that. I rose up to that level. I didn't give up. I mean, it proved how strong of an individual I really was. I think when I was younger, if something became too challenging, I'd kind of just like, oh well, walk away. But then I survived it.
Though both were well learned, neither of them could have expected the near insurmountable challenges St. Elizabeth would present them. Just walking to the house was a nightmare, the path covered with trees, weeds, and debris from decades of neglect. And such a trek did not lead to El Dorado. Instead, it led to a building, barely even a house, infested with rodents, rotten food, waves of garbage, and the outside world forcing itself through the floorboards.
There were hundreds of bats after we cleaned out 3 feet of clothing, and I can't believe they took rotten garbage up there and just left it. Cleaning all that out, and once we had removed all of those things, there were bats that would fly around. They'd come down through the chimneys, and I would have tennis rackets that as they would fly through, I'd bat it and knock it down. Or I would take one of my son's baby blankets and I would try to capture all these bats that would be flying down. We eventually got all the cracks and openings closed up.
Chris and Bill recall the Andrzejewski patriarch sitting on the concrete block in front of the house and crying.
I would have felt the same way. As a matter of fact, I was probably sitting beside him crying at the time, thinking that that's before we had done anything out here.
Yet, like sculptors seeing a piece of marble, the two of them saw something underneath the rot. Instead of a long, extinguished spirit, they saw a soul waiting to be let forth. A phoenix awaiting to rise from the figurative and literal ashes of a forgotten piece of land in Thurmont, Maryland. Bill's all-seeing hands envisioned intricate carpentry, precise brickwork, and innovative construction. Chris's robust eye saw delicate color palettes, inviting interiors, and lush gardens which rivaled even the famed Babylonian landscape.
For me, spending so much time outside is where I get all my design inspiration. I would grab lichen from our woods, the colors of bark and things from our trees, and I would bring it into my color design that I did here. We have stone walls, and this inner stone wall inside the current kitchen, I would find the color gray is within it. Bill loves birds. He feeds, he's very faithful about feeding the birds throughout the year. And I found the most perfect bird fabric. It was expensive, but it's something that I knew, one, that Bill would really enjoy looking at, and so do I. There was a wallpaper. It's black and cream in design and has a sort of a fretwork design within it. When I saw it, it's just like, boom, that's really what I liked. In Rachel's bathroom that's up in the attic, she requested it to look like a tree house. And I picked, again, the greens that I found deep within our woods. And I created what I thought a luministic sky would look like, and found this really unique glass-blown border to finish it off there. I had just come back from a trip to Poland, and I wanted to recreate that memory because this was my bathroom and little Poland.
What each lacked, the other more than compensated, and together they stepped into their future.
It is my life. It represents all of my life's work. It expresses my talents and gifts as an individual.
I don't think it was anything more than just a crazy drive of some nature to get this thing done and to make it something special. Most of our friends and most of the people that visited here thought we were nuts, for sure. They didn't know what to think of us, but they certainly thought the project was crazy. And I can see why. It was.
The path was not easy, but they knew this. Sacrificing time, money, sweat, and tears, the two began resurrecting St. Elizabeth to her former glory in an effort not dissimilar to the concours d'elegance often seen in other restorations. And when one sees the abhorrent state of the property in 1976, it is truly a testament to the skill and determination of Bill and Chris that such a restoration was even imaginable, let alone possible.
St. Elizabeth represents my entire life. I mean, I came out here, I was just 21. I was alone. I wasn't around family. And when we took on this project, it was a sorry state. But Bill and I, we could see what it could become.
This just happened to be a home that had character and early character that was something that both of us liked. I don't think there was anybody that didn't think we were nuts, especially when they came down and saw it before we did anything to it. You had to be here to appreciate that.
I think we were the happiest when we were working on this. Kind of like the humdrum of the engine of the tractor motor, and then all of a sudden things start to take off.
Crumbling walls, rusted plumbing, dangerous stairs, suffocating debris, the Eylers were nearly overwhelmed. But their family kept them going, and like the original revolutionaries who saw the potential of those 13 colonies in the face of an overwhelming obstacle, Bill and Chris, with the help of plenty of other hands, like friend Billy Holt and contractor David Cease, managed to bring to life that which no one else saw.
William Holt. And this will be my 30th year down here with Chris and Bill. I enjoyed them all. Just being outside, working in the ground, I just enjoy it. Bill keeps telling me he's gonna bury me on the place. There was times I had to work 80 hours a week. I wanted to come down here, and then before I'd get down here, I'd go to another job because it seemed like the good Lord was telling me, go do this, instead of coming down here. See, when you're working on a place like this here, you need to do what is necessary. Like I said, before you mow, you got to pick up sticks. I remember years ago when when you had all these trees, I mean, it would take 4 days to pick up the sticks before you could mow. And sometimes you didn't get them all there picked up, and guess what happens? They mow up, and then you got twice as many to get. And of course, there's the weather sometimes. You got to do according to the weather. It's time consuming, but I enjoy because you look at it, you see how it used to be, and now you look at it now, it's like, I did that it's like, wow. I mean, it takes us all, you know.
It was a collaborative effort by many, many people. You know, the contractor, the Cease family. And the neat thing about the Cease family is that their family came over from Germany on the same boat that our family did. Jimmy Roten, the bricklayer that lives down Kriggerstown Road, the Stamballs, they were the electricians. You know, their families can come and see what their fathers did, not just here, but up at the cabin. It was quality work, and it was fun to see that they too were inspired by what they were doing. It just wasn't a job, but it was bringing to fruition a dream, a vision that we all had.
Though the time was stressful and aggravating, the results were astounding. Bill and Christine prioritized original artifacts and construction practices when available, insisting on capturing the original essence of the home. From the beaded chair rail mentioned earlier, to the fine filigree adorning the various walls, to the doors separating the multitude of rooms, the original home was never sacrificed. This careful consideration for appliances, fixtures, and accessories that preserved the home's heritage while modernizing it for the 20th century allowed the house to become a masterpiece of design. So much so that it was even featured on a 1989 house tour in Frederick County.
That was insane because I had no idea what it really was going to be like. No one else did either.
But America did not content itself with those original 13 colonies, and though America's expansion is wrought with tragedy, controversy, and outright evil, St. Elizabeth's expansion is anything but these things. Instead, a product of Eyler's love and hard work, the true foundations of America. Bill and Chris, after faithfully restoring St. Elizabeth, decided to make two major additions to the home. The first was a downstairs kitchen and porch, converting the home into a proper two-story abode. Completed in 1990, over 2 centuries since John Weller's purchase, this addition was another example of Chris's eye for design and Bill's handy abilities. The second edition, completed in 2008 and pushing the home into the 21st century, included a fully formed living room and garage, again mixing the remarkable abilities of both Chris and Bill. Among other things, the Eylers included a fully restored mantelpiece as well as a faux casse crafted by Bill himself. But a house is not a home until it's filled with evidence of its love, and St. Elizabeth has no dearth of affection. The home is saturated with custom furniture pieces, many of them crafted by the Eyler team, with woodworking by Bill and upholstery and design by Chris. Some of the highlights include a unique pair of wing chairs, a needlepoint stool with needlepoint work done entirely by Chris, and various chests that adorn the upper levels. But time was once more plotting, and it wanted to finally get revenge. Instead of attacking St. Elizabeth, however, it went after her defenders. Personal traumas threatened to destroy Bill and Chris and prevent them from reviving St. Elizabeth. Bill was diagnosed with a terminal illness, and Chris was forced to retire after being diagnosed with a form of leukemia. The effects were devastating, and the future bleak. With a family to support and lives to rebuild, they had no other choice but to walk away from the project and from St. Elizabeth. Except they didn't. Against the odds, and impassioned by their children and grandchildren, the Eylers saw their plight and rebelled, scoffing before time and doubling down on their efforts to restore what had almost been lost. They were so determined, in fact, that they not only continued their restoration efforts, they also continued to expand the St. Elizabeth property, rebuilding the similarly dilapidated barn in 1998, adding a hand-built log cabin in 2003, which they still use as a rental property, and adding a luxury apartment, colloquially known as the Barnament, to the barn in 2020. Time's coup de grace had failed. St. Elizabeth is not merely a fossil of preserved history, nor is it a lonesome museum dedicated to a bygone period of America. It is a living example of that original American spirit, of endurance, of ingenuity in the face of overwhelming odds. St. Elizabeth, like the spirit of America, lives for each of us today, a reminder of what is possible. Time remains a specter for St. Elizabeth, ever creeping in the background. But the legacy the Eylers continue to build is the strongest defense that St. Elizabeth has ever had, and they do not plan on stopping anytime soon. Both Bill and Chris continue working and operating the property to this day with the hope that future generations will be able to share her pleasures and maintain her ways.
Listen, I'd like to think that if they could, they would, be happy, very appreciative of preserving, the home.
I like to think the house could be here 500 years from now if somebody takes care of it, keeps a good roof on it.
The story of St. Elizabeth is remarkable, and her revival an astounding success. But perhaps the greatest achievement of the Eylers is not the rebuilding or remodeling of a nearly destroyed home, nor the expansion of a centuries-old land. Perhaps instead, their greatest achievement is their persistence in the face of death, of destruction, of failure. Perhaps their greatest achievement, rather than any physical feat, is that thing which is so amazingly embodied by St. Elizabeth: life.
We do. We keep that going, and I'm going to boil some husks tonight.
Put lard on it,
As a
Bill.
matter of fact, Christine grew up that way with husks.
Explains a lot.
Yeah. That's why I found her so enticing.